This mother bear begs for help. What this German Shepherd of a human boy did at the door put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The morning sun barely peeked through the tall pine trees as Jacob Bennett stepped onto the porch of his family's cottage. At just 12 years old, Jacob loved these quiet moments when the forest seemed to hold its breath. His loyal German Shepherd Rex stood beside him, ears perked up and tail wagging slowly. The cottage sat at the very edge of the forest, far enough from town to feel magical, but close enough that Jacob's parents could drive to the market without worry. Today was different, though. Jacob's parents had left early for supplies, leaving him with Rex as his protector. "It's just us today, buddy," Jacob whispered, ruffling the dog's thick fur. Rex suddenly froze, his body becoming stiff as a board. His ears stood straight up, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Jacob asked, following Rex's intense gaze toward the tree line. That's when he saw it. A large shape moving slowly between the trees. At first, Jacob thought it might be a fallen branch swaying in the wind, but then the shape emerged into the clearing. It was a bear, a massive mother bear with dark brown fur that looked matted and dirty in spots. Jacob's heart pounded against his ribs. He had been taught what to do if he ever encountered a bear in the woods. Stay calm, make yourself look big, back away slowly. But this bear wasn't charging or showing signs of aggression. Instead, she moved with an uneven step, her huge paw touching the ground awkwardly. Her eyes, deep pools of brown, seemed to lock onto Jacob with an intensity that made him shiver. Rex's growl grew louder, but he didn't bark or lunge forward. The dog seemed confused, his protective instincts battling with something else. Something in the bear's behavior that didn't signal danger. "Easy, Rex," Jacob whispered, placing a steady hand on the dog's back. The bear stopped about 20 feet from the porch. She swayed slightly, her massive head hanging lower than seemed normal. Then she did something that made Jacob's breath catch in his throat. She looked directly at him and made a soft, rumbling sound that wasn't a roar or a growl. It sounded almost like a whimper. The bear took another uneven step forward, then glanced back toward the forest. She repeated this motion, looking at Jacob, then back at the forest, then at Jacob again. A cold realization washed over him. She wasn't just wandering by. She was trying to tell him something. "Rex, stay," Jacob commanded, his voice barely audible. The German Shepherd obeyed but remained tense, ready to protect his boy if needed. Jacob's mind raced with questions. Why would a wild bear approach a human home? Why did she keep looking back at the forest? And why did her eyes seem to hold such desperation? As if answering his unspoken questions, the mother bear let out another soft sound, more urgent this time. She took a halting step back toward the forest, then turned to look at Jacob again. A thin trail of what looked like blood marked her path from the trees to where she now stood. Jacob's fear began to mix with something else. Curiosity, and a strange feeling that something important was happening. His parents always told him to stay away from wild animals, especially bears. But as he looked into the mother bear's pleading eyes, Jacob knew this was no ordinary encounter. This mother bear was asking for help, and somehow Jacob knew he was meant to answer. The mother bear took another step backward, her movements becoming more urgent. She made that strange whimpering sound again, louder this time. Rex's ears flattened slightly, his growl softening to a confused whine. The dog looked up at Jacob, as if asking what they should do. "I don't understand," Jacob whispered, stepping carefully down from the porch. His heart hammered in his chest. Everything he knew about wild animals told him to go back inside and lock the door. Bears were dangerous, unpredictable, but this one seemed different. The blood trailing behind her glistened in the morning light. She was hurt, or maybe... Jacob thought of the nature shows he loved to watch. Bears had cubs. Could that be it? The mother bear kept looking back toward the forest, as if something precious waited there. "Rex, come," Jacob said softly. The German shepherd hesitated for only a moment before joining his young master at the bottom of the porch steps. Together they stood, boy and dog, facing the massive creature that could easily kill them both with a single swipe of her powerful paw. The mother bear made no threatening moves. Instead, she backed up 3 more steps, never taking her eyes off Jacob. She was leading them somewhere. "Mom and Dad are going to kill me," Jacob muttered, but something deep inside told him this was important. Maybe once in a lifetime, important. He reached down and touched Rex's collar, drawing comfort from the dog's steady presence. "Let's follow her, but stay close to me." Jacob took a deep breath and stepped forward. The mother bear huffed, not in anger, but what seemed like relief. She turned and began limping toward the forest, looking back every few steps to make sure they followed. As they reached the tree line, Jacob hesitated. The forest stretched dark and deep before them. His parents had strict rules about venturing into the woods alone. But the bear paused, turning her massive head to look at him with those intelligent eyes. She made a soft, urgent sound. Okay, Jacob said. "We're coming." They followed the mother bear deeper into the forest. Rex stayed pressed against Jacob's leg, no longer growling but alert to every sound and movement. The trees grew thicker, blocking much of the morning light. Jacob stumbled over roots and rocks, trying to keep up with the bear's surprisingly quick pace despite her limp. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes, the mother bear stopped in a small clearing. She looked at Jacob, then turned her attention to a fallen tree at the edge of the clearing. The massive trunk had split, creating a hollow space underneath. From that dark space came a sound that made Jacob's skin prickle, a high-pitched, frightened cry. The mother bear approached the fallen tree and pawed gently at the opening, making soft rumbling sounds. The crying grew louder, more desperate. That's when Jacob realized what was happening. "Her cub," he whispered to Rex. "It's trapped under there." The mother bear turned to look at Jacob, and in her eyes he saw something that shook him to his core. Understanding. This wild animal had sought him out, had somehow known that she needed human help to save her baby. Jacob moved closer, careful to keep Rex by his side. The German shepherd was tense but not aggressive. He seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. As Jacob neared the fallen tree, he saw the problem. A young bear cub, no bigger than Rex, was trapped in the hollow space beneath the trunk. But that wasn't all. Jacob gasped when he saw the metal teeth clamped around the cub's back leg, a hunter's trap. "Who would do this?" Jacob whispered, anger flaring inside him. "Who would set a trap so close to our home?" The cub whimpered, struggling weakly against the cruel metal jaws. The mother bear made a mournful sound that tore at Jacob's heart. No wonder she had sought human help. The trap was a human creation. Perhaps in her animal wisdom, she knew only a human could undo what another human had done. But Jacob had never seen a trap like this before, let alone tried to open one. His hands trembled as he knelt down to examine it, keeping a respectful distance from the frightened cub. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted aloud. The mother bear watched him, her eyes never leaving his face. She seemed to be waiting, trusting. Just then, Rex barked, a sharp warning sound. Jacob spun around and froze. At the edge of the clearing stood a man dressed in camouflage, a rifle cradled in his arms. His weathered face registered shock at the scene before him. A boy and his dog, a mother bear and a trapped cub. "What in tarnation?" the man exclaimed, raising his rifle slightly. "Boy, you get away from those bears right now?" The mother bear turned toward the hunter, rising to her full height with a deep, rumbling growl. Her massive body positioned itself between the hunter and her cub. Jacob's heart nearly stopped. The peaceful, pleading bear had transformed into a wall of protective fury. "No, wait!" Jacob shouted, stepping forward with his hands raised. "Don't shoot her! She's not trying to hurt anyone." The hunter kept his rifle trained on the mother bear, his finger hovering near the trigger. "Son, you don't know what you're talking about. That's a wild animal about to charge. Now move aside." "She won't charge unless you threaten her cub," Jacob insisted, his voice cracking with emotion. "Look," he pointed to the trap. "Someone set an illegal trap, and her baby is caught in it. That's why she came to my house. She was asking for help." The hunter's eyes narrowed as he peered at the fallen tree. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the frightened whimpering of the trapped cub and the mother bear's warning growls. "Please," Jacob begged, "just lower your gun. She knows you can help. That's why she found me. She's smart enough to know humans have to fix this." Rex whined, his tail tucked low as he sensed the tension in the clearing. The mother bear remained standing, but had stopped growling, her eyes moving between Jacob and the hunter, as if assessing who posed the greater threat to her baby. After what felt like an eternity, the hunter slowly lowered his rifle. "That's a bear trap, all right," he said, his voice gruff but quieter now. "But I didn't set it. Bear trapping's been illegal in these parts for years." "Can you help us open it?" Jacob asked, relief washing over him as the immediate danger passed. The hunter hesitated, then slung his rifle over his shoulder. "I suppose I can. I've removed these before from deer that got caught by accident." He took a cautious step forward, then stopped as the mother bear huffed a warning. "It's okay," Jacob said, unsure if he was reassuring the hunter or the bear. "She understands." "That's a mighty big assumption, son," the hunter replied, but he continued his slow approach. The mother bear watched warily, but made no move to attack. She seemed to understand that the hunter, despite carrying the same scent as the trap that had hurt her cub, was now trying to help. "My name's Jacob," the boy offered, hoping conversation might ease the tension. "This is Rex." "Frank Dawson," the hunter replied, eyes still fixed on the mother bear as he inched closer. "Live about 3 miles east of here. Been hunting these woods for 40 years, but I've never seen anything like this." When Frank reached the fallen tree, he knelt down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The mother bear huffed again, but backed up just enough to give him access to the trap. "Poor little fella," Frank murmured, looking at the cub. "These traps are nasty business. Whoever set this needs to be reported." Jacob watched as Frank reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of heavy gloves. He put them on and then retrieved a tool from another pocket, something that looked like oversized pliers. "Always carry these when I'm in the woods," he explained to Jacob. "Never know when you might find an animal in distress. Even if it ain't legal to trap 'em, there are still folks who do." The cub cried out, as Frank carefully positioned the tool on the trap's mechanism. The mother bear instantly tensed, a growl building in her throat. "It's okay," Jacob said soothingly, though his heart raced. "He's going to help your baby. Just a little more patience." To his amazement, the mother bear seemed to understand. She remained watchful but allowed Frank to continue. With a grunt of effort, Frank squeezed the tool, and the trap's jaws slowly opened. The cub immediately tried to scramble away, but its injured leg gave out. Easy there, Frank murmured. Let me see that leg, little one. The cub cowered against the fallen tree, whimpering in pain and fear. The mother bear moved closer, sniffing her baby and making soft, comforting sounds. She gently nudged the cub toward Frank, an act of trust so profound that Jacob felt tears spring to his eyes. Never in all my born days, Frank whispered, shaking his head in wonder. She's asking me to help him. With gentle hands, Frank examined the cub's leg. It's not broken, thank goodness, just a bad cut and some bruising. He'll limp for a while, but bears are tough. He'll heal up just fine. Frank reached into yet another pocket and pulled out a small first aid kit. Always come prepared, he said, catching Jacob's surprised look. My wife's a veterinarian, taught me the basics of animal care. With quick, practiced movements, Frank cleaned the wound with an antiseptic wipe, then applied a bandage that would eventually fall off as the cub moved around. That should keep infection away until it starts healing properly, he explained. The mother bear watched every movement, her eyes never leaving her cub. When Frank finished and backed away, she immediately went to her baby, sniffing the bandage and then gently licking the cub's face. Jacob couldn't believe what he was seeing. This is amazing, he whispered. Frank nodded, a look of wonder on his weathered face. In all my years in these woods, I've never seen anything like it. That bear knew exactly what she was doing when she came to find help. The cub struggled to its feet, testing its injured leg. It limped badly, but could move. The mother bear gently nuzzled her baby, encouraging it to follow her. She took a few steps, then paused and turned back toward Jacob and Frank. For a long moment, she stood there, her deep brown eyes fixed on them. Then she did something that would stay with Jacob for the rest of his life. The massive bear lowered her head in what could only be described as a bow. She held the position for several seconds before raising her head again and looking directly at Jacob. She's thanking us, Jacob whispered, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. I believe she is, Frank agreed, his own voice rough with emotion. I've hunted these woods since I was younger than you, but I've never felt the way I do right now. Rex, who had stayed dutifully by Jacob's side throughout the encounter, gave a soft whine. The mother bear's attention shifted to the German shepherd. Instead of showing aggression, she made a soft huffing sound that almost seemed like acknowledgement. Rex knew, Jacob said suddenly. When she first came to our cottage, Rex didn't attack. He sensed she needed help. Frank nodded thoughtfully. Animals understand each other in ways we humans can only guess at. Your dog's a good judge of character. The tender moment was interrupted by the cub's impatient cry. It had moved several feet away and was looking back at its mother expectantly. The mother bear gave one final look at Jacob and Frank before turning to join her baby. Together, the bears moved slowly into the deeper forest, the mother staying close to support her limping cub. We should go too, Frank said, putting away his tools. It's not safe to hang around. That mother will be extra protective now. Jacob nodded, suddenly remembering his parents. Oh no. My parents will be back soon. They'll be worried sick if I'm not home. Then let's get you there, Frank replied. I could use a word with your folks anyway. We need to find out who's setting these illegal traps. As they made their way back through the forest, Jacob found himself walking beside a man he would have once considered an enemy. Jacob's family weren't hunters, and he had grown up thinking of hunting as cruel. But Frank had shown compassion and skill when it mattered most. Why do you hunt if you care so much about animals? Jacob asked, finally, the question that had been bothering him since Frank had so gently treated the bear cub. Frank was quiet for a moment before answering. There's responsible hunting, and then there's cruelty. What you saw back there, that trap, that's cruelty. No animal should suffer like that. He adjusted his rifle on his shoulder. The hunting I do is for food, not sport. I use every part of the animal, waste nothing, and I make sure the death is quick and clean. He glanced down at Jacob. The forest provides for us, but we have to respect it in return. Jacob considered this as they walked. He wasn't sure he agreed completely, but he understood better now that the world wasn't as simple as he'd thought. "Will the bears be okay?" he asked after a while. "I reckon so," Frank replied. "That mother is strong, and the cubs young enough to heal quickly. Bears are survivors." They emerged from the forest near Jacob's cottage just as a car pulled into the driveway. Jacob's parents stepped out, arms full of grocery bags. "Jacob?" his mother called, spotting him at the edge of the trees. Her expression quickly changed from surprise to concern when she saw the rifle-carrying stranger beside her son. "Jacob Bennett!" "What's going on?" Rex barked and raced toward the cottage, tail wagging as if nothing unusual had happened that morning. Jacob followed more slowly, suddenly aware of how much explaining he had to do. "Mom, Dad, this is Mr. Dawson, and you won't believe what just happened," Jacob began. Over cups of hot chocolate at the kitchen table, coffee for the adults, Jacob told the incredible story. At first, his parents looked skeptical, exchanging worried glances as if concerned their son had an overactive imagination. But Frank confirmed every detail, adding his own observations about the mother bear's unusual behavior. "I've been hunting these woods for decades," Frank told Jacob's parents, "and I've never seen anything like it. That bear knew exactly what she was doing. She found your boy because she needed help, plain and simple." "It's extraordinary," Jacob's father said, shaking his head in amazement, "but also concerning that someone is setting illegal traps so close to our property." "That's why I walked back with your boy," Frank said. "Those traps are dangerous, to wildlife and to people. We need to alert the Forest Service and get them removed." Jacob's mother reached out and squeezed her son's hand. "I'm proud of you for helping those bears, but also terrified thinking of what could have happened. Promise me you won't go into the forest alone again." "I promise," Jacob said, though part of him wondered if he could keep that promise. The forest felt different to him now, less frightening and more like a place of wonder and mystery. After Frank left, promising to return with a forest ranger to search for more traps, Jacob sat on the porch with Rex. The German shepherd lay with his head on Jacob's lap, content and peaceful as if saving a bear cub was all in a day's work. "You knew she wasn't dangerous, didn't you, boy?" Jacob said softly, scratching behind Rex's ears. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for." Rex's tail thumped against the wooden porch in response. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Jacob thought he saw movement at the edge of the forest. He squinted, trying to make out the shape in the fading light. For just a moment he thought he saw the silhouette of a large bear, standing on its hind legs at the tree line, a smaller shape beside it. Then the shapes were gone, melting back into the darkness of the trees. Jacob smiled. Whether it had been the bears or just his imagination, he liked to think they had come to say goodbye. That night, as Jacob lay in bed with Rex curled up on the floor beside him, he couldn't stop thinking about the mother bear's eyes, so full of intelligence and emotion. He had always known animals were special, but today had shown him something more. There was a connection between all living things, a silent understanding that went beyond words or even species. His mom peeked in to check on him before turning in for the night. "Still thinking about your adventure?" she asked, seeing he was awake. Jacob nodded. "Mom, Do you think animals are smarter than we give them credit for? She sat on the edge of his bed, considering the question seriously. I think there are many kinds of intelligence in this world, Jacob, and I think humans often make the mistake of believing we're the only ones who have it. That mother bear knew exactly who could help her baby, Jacob said. Out of all the places she could have gone, she came straight to our door. His mother smiled. Perhaps she sensed something special in you, a kind heart that wouldn't turn away from someone in need, even if that someone had fur and claws. After she left, Jacob drifted toward sleep, his mind filled with images of the day's events. Just before he fell asleep completely, he thought he heard a distant sound from the forest. A low, rumbling call that might have been a mother bear, telling her cub a bedtime story about the day a human boy and his faithful dog had answered her plea for help. In the weeks that followed, forest rangers found and removed 6 more illegal traps. Frank Dawson became a regular visitor to the Bennett cottage, teaching Jacob about the woods and its inhabitants. Jacob's parents even agreed to let him accompany Frank on nature walks, though hunting was strictly off the table. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the mist still clung to the trees, Jacob would sit on the porch with Rex and watch the edge of the forest. He never saw the mother bear and her cub again, but deep down, he knew they were out there, living their bear lives in the depths of the forest that no longer seemed so frightening. The story of the mother bear who asked for human help spread throughout the community. Some believed it, some didn't, but it changed something in those who listened with open hearts. A reminder that compassion could bridge even the widest gaps between species. As for Jacob, he learned something that day that would guide him for the rest of his life. Sometimes the most extraordinary connections happen when we're brave enough to listen. Not to words, but to the silent plea in another's eyes, even when those eyes belong to a creature wild and different from ourselves. 10 years later, the old pickup truck bumped along the Forest Service road, its tires crunching over fallen pine needles and small rocks. Jacob Bennett, now 22 years old, adjusted his park ranger hat and peered through the windshield at the familiar landscape. After graduating with a degree in wildlife biology, he had returned to the forests of his childhood, now as their protector. In the passenger seat sat an aging but still alert German shepherd, gray now around his muzzle. Rex's ears perked up as they neared a particular bend in the road. "You remember this place too, don't you, boy?" Jacob said softly, reaching over to scratch behind Rex's ears. They were approaching the clearing where, 10 years earlier, they had helped save a bear cub from an illegal trap. That day had changed everything for Jacob. What had begun as a frightening encounter with a desperate mother bear had steered the course of his entire life. Jacob parked the truck and stepped out, inhaling deeply. The scent of pine and rich earth filled his lungs. Rex jumped down more carefully than he once would have and stayed close to Jacob's side. "Come on, old friend. Let's check the cameras." As part of his research project, Jacob had set up wildlife cameras throughout this section of the forest. His particular focus was on the black bear population, tracking their movements, behavior, and adaptations to the ever-encroaching human developments. The first camera was attached to a tree overlooking a small stream. Jacob removed the memory card and replaced it with a fresh one, tucking the used card into his shirt pocket. He'd review the footage later at the ranger station. "Dr. Dawson thinks we might have caught footage of a mother with 3 cubs," Jacob told Rex as they moved deeper into the forest. That would be the largest litter recorded in this area in decades. Frank Dawson had hung up his hunting rifle years ago, instead returning to school to finish the veterinary degree he'd abandoned in his youth. Now, Dr. Frank Dawson worked alongside Jacob, combining his intimate knowledge of the forest with modern conservation techniques. As they approached the second camera, Jacob slowed his pace. Something felt different about the clearing ahead. Rex sensed it too, his body tensing slightly though he made no sound. "Easy, boy," Jacob murmured. "What is it?" They entered the clearing cautiously. The wildlife camera appeared untouched, still securely fastened to its tree. But as Jacob scanned the area, he noticed fresh scratches on a nearby trunk. Bear marks, and high up, suggesting a large animal. "Someone's been marking territory," Jacob observed, examining the scratches. Based on their height and pattern, they had been made by an adult black bear, and recently. As Jacob was replacing this camera's memory card, Rex suddenly froze, his attention fixed on the opposite side of the clearing. Jacob followed his gaze and felt his breath catch in his throat. At the edge of the trees stood a large black bear, female, based on her size and features. She watched them calmly, making no aggressive moves. Behind her, 2 adolescent cubs peered curiously from behind tree trunks. "It's okay," Jacob said softly, more to Rex than to himself. The German Shepherd remained still but relaxed, as if he somehow knew they weren't in danger. The mother bear took a step forward, then another. Jacob's heart raced, but years of training kept him outwardly calm. He knew better than to run. Bears could outpace humans with ease, and running triggered their chase instinct. "Easy now," he whispered, placing a gentle hand on Rex's back. The bear stopped about 30 feet away. She raised her head slightly, nostrils flaring as she took in their scent. Then she did something that sent a shock of recognition through Jacob's body. She lowered her head in what looked remarkably like a bow, held it for several seconds, then raised it again to look directly at Jacob. "It can't be," he whispered, memories flooding back. "After all these years, could it really be you?" The mathematical probability was small. Black bears in this region typically lived 15 to 25 years in the wild. The mother bear from his childhood would be middle-aged now if she had survived the many threats bears faced. Hunters, vehicles, territorial disputes, disease. Yet there was something in this bear's behavior, in the intelligent, almost knowing look in her eyes, that stirred Jacob's deepest memories. One of the cubs made a huffing sound, impatient. The mother bear turned her massive head toward her offspring, then back to Jacob. She made a soft sound, neither threatening nor fearful. "I think she remembers us, Rex," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. "Or at least, she remembers what happened here." Could bears pass down memories to their young? Could this be a daughter of that original mother bear, somehow carrying the family story of human kindness in her DNA? Jacob's scientific mind rejected such fanciful thinking, but his heart, the heart of the boy who had once followed a desperate mother bear into the forest, wondered. The mother bear backed away slowly, returning to her cubs. With gentle nudges, she guided them deeper into the forest until all 3 disappeared among the trees. Jacob stood motionless, overwhelmed by what had just happened. "Did you see that, Rex?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The German Shepherd whined softly and pressed against Jacob's leg. That evening, back at the small cabin that served as both ranger station and Jacob's home, he downloaded the footage from the memory cards. Most of it showed the expected wildlife activities. Deer drinking from the stream, raccoons investigating the forest floor, a fox trotting purposefully across the frame. Then, on the second camera, he found what he was looking for. The mother bear and her cubs had passed by just yesterday. The footage showed her stopping, rising onto her hind legs to sniff at the camera. Her movements were deliberate, almost as if she knew she was being watched. "Remarkable," murmured Dr. Dawson, who had joined Jacob to review the footage. The older man's hair was now completely white, but his eyes still held the same intensity they had on the day he'd helped free a trapped bear cub. She's showing no fear of the camera. Most bears avoid anything with human scent. Frank, Jacob said, using the familiar name he'd earned the right to use years ago. Do you think it could be her? The same bear from back then? Dr. Dawson studied the footage carefully. Hard to say with certainty, but look at this marking on her chest, that irregular patch of lighter fur. If we had clear images from back then, we might be able to compare. Jacob sat back in his chair thinking. I don't have photos, but... He reached for a shelf behind his desk and pulled down an old sketchbook. I used to draw her, over and over, trying to capture exactly what I remembered. He flipped through pages of a child's drawings, increasingly detailed as the years progressed. Near the back, he found what he was looking for, a carefully rendered portrait of the mother bear, complete with notes about distinctive markings. Here, he said, pointing to the drawing. I always remembered this lighter patch on her chest, shaped almost like a crescent moon. Dr. Dawson leaned closer to the computer screen, then back to the drawing. I'll be damned, he whispered. It does match. The pattern's the same. So it is her, Jacob said, a strange feeling of completion washing over him. After all this time. Well, I'm not making any official claims without DNA evidence, Dr. Dawson said, his scientific caution reasserting itself. But off the record, I'd say there's a good chance that's your bear, Jacob. Later that night, after Dr. Dawson had gone home and Rex was sleeping by the fireplace, Jacob stepped onto the cabin's porch. The forest stretched dark and mysterious before him, full of secrets and stories. Somewhere out there, a mother bear was curled up with her cubs, perhaps in a den not unlike the one where she herself had been born. Jacob wondered what stories she told her cubs. Did bears have ways of sharing their experiences, their knowledge? Did they remember kindnesses shown to them? Science would say no. Bears operated on instinct, on learned behaviors passed down through generations that helped them survive. They didn't tell stories or harbor long memories of specific humans who had once helped them. But Jacob had seen something in that bear's eyes today. Recognition, connection, perhaps even gratitude. Some things couldn't be measured by science or explained by biology. Some things could only be felt, understood. Even from this distance, Jacob could see the distinctive crescent moon pattern on her chest. Is she? He couldn't finish the question. She'll live, Doctor, Dawson assured him. The bullet missed anything vital, but that's not why I called you here. He pointed to the far corner of the enclosure. There, nestled in a makeshift den of straw and branches, were 3 tiny bear cubs, so young their eyes were barely open. She gave birth here, Jacob whispered, last night. Dr. Dawson nodded. The stress of the injury and transport could have triggered early labor. It's a miracle they all survived. Jacob stared at the mother bear and her newborns, emotion welling up inside him. So, what happens now? That's what I wanted to talk to you about, Dr. Dawson said. Standard protocol would be to keep her here until she's healed, then release her and the cubs back into the wild. But with cubs this young and her injury, they're vulnerable, Jacob finished, especially with poachers still out there. Dr. Dawson nodded grimly. We've increased patrols since finding her, but we can't watch every acre of forest all the time. Jacob thought for a moment. What about the new sanctuary section? The area that was just approved for protection? It's further from the boundaries, harder for poachers to access without being detected. That could work, Doctor, Dawson agreed. But it would mean keeping them here longer, until she's fully healed and the cubs are stronger, and we'd need to monitor them after release, make sure they're adapting to the new territory. I can do that, Jacob said without hesitation. I'll set up additional cameras in the release area, track their movements. Dr. Dawson smiled at his former protege's enthusiasm. I thought you might volunteer, but there's something else to consider. His expression grew serious. She knows you, Jacob. Or at least she seems to. When the rescue team brought her in, she was agitated, defensive, until you arrived at the center yesterday for your regular rounds. The staff reported she calmed almost immediately when you walked past her enclosure. She couldn't have seen me, Jacob protested. The observation windows are one-way glass, but she could have caught your scent, Dr. Dawson pointed out. Bears have an incredible sense of smell. If this is indeed the same bear from all those years ago, she might remember your scent. Jacob looked back at the mother bear. She had raised her massive head and seemed to be looking directly at him, despite the one-way glass between them. What are you suggesting? Jacob asked, though he suspected he already knew. I'm suggesting that you be the one to oversee her rehabilitation and release. Be present for her feedings, let her get accustomed to your presence. When the time comes for release, you'll lead the team. Dr. Dawson paused. It's unorthodox, I know. We usually minimize human contact with wild animals being rehabilitated. But in this case we already have a connection, Jacob finished quietly. A history. Over the following weeks, Jacob split his time between his regular duties and the rehabilitation center. True to Dr. Dawson's observations, the mother bear, whom the staff had nicknamed Luna for the crescent moon on her chest, did seem calmer when Jacob was nearby. He would sit quietly outside her enclosure, sometimes reading research papers aloud in a soft voice, sometimes simply watching as she tended to her growing cubs. The bullet wound in her shoulder healed cleanly, thanks to Dr. Dawson's skilled veterinary care. The cubs grew stronger every day, their personalities beginning to emerge. The largest, a male, was bold and curious, always the first to investigate any new item placed in their enclosure. The middle cub, another male, was more cautious but playful, especially with his siblings. The smallest, a female, was watchful, and seemed the most aware of Jacob's presence, often staring at him with intelligent eyes so like her mother's. Jacob found himself talking to them sometimes when no one else was around. "Your mother is famous, you know," he told them one evening, as they tumbled over each other in a play fight. She's the bear who asked for human help. Not many would be brave enough to do that. Luna watched him from her resting spot, her dark eyes unreadable but somehow attentive. "We're going to take you to a special place soon," Jacob continued. "A safe place with plenty of food and no hunters. You'll like it there." As if she understood, Luna made a soft, huffing sound. The day of release came on a perfect early summer morning. The cubs, now much larger and more active, were sedated for transport, as was Luna. Jacob rode in the back of the transport vehicle with them, monitoring their vital signs as they traveled deep into the newly protected sanctuary. The release site had been carefully chosen. A clearing near a stream, with berry bushes nearby and good denning possibilities in the rocky hillside beyond. Jacob's team set up the transport cages in the clearing, doors facing the forest, and then retreated to a safe distance. "Remember, no one approaches until they've all left the cages and moved into the forest," Jacob reminded his team. "Radio silence except for emergencies." They watched through binoculars as the bears gradually woke from sedation. Luna was the first to become fully alert, immediately checking on her cubs. As the youngsters stirred, she investigated her cage door, which had been designed to open from the inside with enough pressure. Jacob held his breath as Luna figured out the mechanism, pushing against the door until it swung open. She stepped cautiously into the clearing, sniffing the air, scanning for threats. Apparently satisfied, she returned to encourage her cubs out of their cages. One by one, the little family emerged fully into their new home. The cubs explored the clearing with typical youngster enthusiasm, while Luna remained vigilant, watching the forest around them. Then she did something none of the wildlife team expected. Instead of leading her cubs immediately into the protective cover of the forest, Luna turned and looked directly at the hillside where Jacob and his team were hidden. "She's spotted us," whispered one of the junior rangers. "How?" "We're downwind." "She knows we're here," Jacob said softly. "She's always known." As if confirming his words, Luna rose onto her hind legs, her impressive height even more apparent from this distance. She stood that way for several long moments, facing their direction, before dropping back to all fours. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to Jacob's eyes, she lowered her head in that now familiar bow. She held the position for several seconds before straightening and calling her cubs with a soft huff. The little bear family disappeared into the forest, the cubs bouncing along behind their mother, off to begin their new life in the sanctuary. That evening, as Jacob sat alone on the porch of his cabin, he wrote in the journal he had kept since childhood. "Today, we released Luna and her cubs into the new sanctuary. Against all scientific probability, against everything I learned in my biology classes, I'm certain of one thing. She knew me. More than that, she trusted me. Not just with her own life, but with the lives of her cubs, the most precious things to any mother bear. Frank says I'm being sentimental, seeing connections where biology would say none exist. Maybe he's right. But I saw her bow today, just as she did 10 years ago, just as she did last year in the clearing. 3 times now, across a decade, this wild creature has acknowledged me not as a threat, not as prey, but as something else entirely. A helper, perhaps even a friend. The new wildlife cameras are in place throughout the sanctuary. I'll be able to track Luna and her family, make sure they're thriving in their new home. But somehow, I don't think I need to worry about them. Luna has survived poachers, hunters, and the countless other dangers of the forest. She's smart, adaptable, and fierce in protecting what she loves. In that way, perhaps bears and humans aren't so different after all. Jacob closed his journal and looked out at the darkening forest. Rex lay at his feet, gray muzzle resting on his paws, still the faithful companion after all these years. Somewhere in the protected heart of the forest, a mother bear was leading her cubs to a safe den for the night. And somehow, across the miles, across the boundary between wild and tame, between human and animal, an invisible thread connected them. A thread woven 10 years ago when a desperate mother sought help from a boy and his dog. It was a thread that would continue to connect them through the years to come, a reminder that sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unexpected encounters. And sometimes a single act of courage and compassion can create ripples that change not just one life, but many, human and animal alike, for generations to come. The legacy. 5 years passed. The wildlife sanctuary had flourished under Jacob's care, becoming a model for conservation efforts across the country. Luna and her cubs had thrived in their protected home, the young bears now nearly grown and beginning to establish territories of their own. On a crisp autumn morning, Jacob stood before a crowd gathered at the sanctuary's new visitor center. Beside him, in a wheelchair but still sharp-eyed and attentive, sat Frank Dawson, now in his 80s. "Today, we don't just dedicate a building," Jacob said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd of conservationists, local families, and government officials. "We dedicate ourselves to a promise that the relationship between humans and wildlife doesn't have to be one of conflict. It can be one of coexistence, of mutual respect, and sometimes even understanding." He gestured to the stone building behind him, its large windows overlooking the forest beyond. "The Dawson Wildlife Education Center will help the next generation understand what Dr. Frank Dawson taught me years ago, that every creature has value, that every life in these woods matters." Frank nodded slightly, the emotion clear in his weathered face. "But there's one more dedication we need to make today," Jacob continued, nodding to his assistant. A cloth covering was removed from a stone marker near the center's entrance, revealing a bronze plaque with the silhouette of a mother bear and 3 cubs. Beneath it, an inscription read, "In honor of Luna, the bear who taught us that courage and trust can cross all boundaries, and to Rex, the dog who knew a friend when he saw one." A polite applause rippled through the crowd, most of whom knew only pieces of the story that had become something of a local legend over the years. Later, after the ceremonies had concluded and the visitors had departed, Jacob walked alone to a viewpoint overlooking a meadow deep in the sanctuary. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber. A weathered wooden bench had been placed there years earlier, his private spot to observe without disturbing the wildlife below. He sat down, feeling the familiar smooth wood beneath his hands. Rex had passed away peacefully 2 winters ago, after 17 faithful years as Jacob's companion. Jacob still felt the absence keenly, especially in moments of quiet reflection like this. Movement at the meadow's edge caught his attention. A large black bear emerged from the trees, moving with the unhurried confidence of an animal in its prime. Even from this distance, the crescent moon marking on her chest was visible. Luna, now in the full power of her maturity. Behind her came another bear, smaller but still substantial. One of her daughters from that second litter, the thoughtful one who had watched Jacob so intently during their rehabilitation. The younger bear now had 2 cubs of her own, tiny bundles of fur that tumbled and played at the meadow's edge. Jacob watched, transfixed, as 4 generations of bears, from the matriarch Luna to her newest grand cubs, foraged peacefully in the protected meadow. This was his life's work made manifest, not just saving individual animals but preserving entire bloodlines, entire futures. Something caught Luna's attention. She raised her massive head, testing the air, Then, with deliberate purpose, she looked directly up at the viewpoint where Jacob sat. Even at this distance, their eyes seemed to meet. Slowly, Jacob stood and raised his hand in a small wave. To his amazement, Luna rose onto her hind legs, her full, impressive height displayed in the golden light. She remained that way for several heartbeats before dropping back to all fours. Her daughter, curious about this interaction, looked up at the viewpoint too. Luna made a soft sound, almost as if she were explaining something important to her offspring. Then she led her family back toward the forest, pausing at the edge to look once more at Jacob before disappearing among the trees. As darkness fell over the sanctuary, Jacob remained at the viewpoint, stars emerging in the clear sky above. He thought about the strange, beautiful path his life had taken, from a frightened boy following a desperate mother bear into the forest, to the man who now protected her descendants and hundreds of other creatures. All because, on one extraordinary day, he had been brave enough to trust a wild creature's plea for help. From his pocket, Jacob took a small worn object, Rex's old dog tag, which he carried as a reminder of his faithful friend. The metal caught the last light of day, glinting like a star fallen to earth. "We did good, didn't we, Rex?" he whispered to the memory of his companion, to the spirit of the forest, to whatever forces had woven their lives together in such an unexpected tapestry. A soft breeze stirred the trees below, carrying the night sounds of the forest upward. The distant call of an owl, the rustle of leaves, and perhaps, if one listened closely enough, the contented huffs of a mother bear leading her family home through the darkness. In that moment, Jacob understood a truth both simple and profound. There was no separation, not really. The lines humans drew between themselves and the wild world were illusions. We were all connected in a great web of life. Bear and boy, dog and deer, forest and field. And sometimes, in rare and precious moments when we're open to it, that connection becomes visible, tangible, a silent communication across the boundaries we imagine divide us. A mother bear coming to a cottage door. A boy following her into the forest. A lifetime dedicated to protecting what we love. These are the moments that change us forever. These are the stories that become our legacy. As Jacob finally turned to leave, a shooting star blazed across the night sky. A brief, brilliant reminder that even in a universe so vast, individual lives could shine with meaning and purpose. Just as a single encounter had illuminated his path, perhaps his work would light the way for others long after he was gone. The sanctuary would remain, Luna's descendants would thrive, and somewhere in the collective memory of the forest, the story would continue, of the day a mother bear asked for help, and a boy was brave enough to answer.